Hey AAF students, welcome back to your next video in AAF, your last one of Unit 6. I was not originally going to make a video for the little review book, but then I figured, why not? So here you go. So you are making your Unit 6 little review book that you are going to be submitting as you are pretty familiar with at this point, right? This is our 6th time doing it. So if you stray a little bit from the design of it, that's fine. Just make sure that it's something that is a resource to you that you have moving forward, right? So not just to satisfy your teacher, but something that you can actually pull out and use in the future. So even if right now you're like, I know this. So I don't need to write it down, include it in there because it's pertinent to this unit, and you're going to be studying rational functions again as you move on and applying these skills. And to be able to pull out a resource that is kind of all inclusive is really the purpose behind this. So keep that in mind as you're completing your little review book. And I know many of you guys at this point kind of complete these as we go throughout the units, which is amazing. So if you have some things structured a little bit different, that's completely fine. So Unit 6, rational functions. So I started this off and I kind of went in order, and I did factoring review. Factoring's super important, right? I would give myself examples of factoring, right? Different forms of it. Think about trinomials, right? And I'm not just saying write this word. Give yourself an example. Let yourself know what it looks like so that it's not a barrier as you move forward, right? Difference of squares was a type of factoring. Sum and difference of cubes. Greatest common factor. Right? Maybe something's not factorable and that's called prime. Right? Like you have a lot of resources, use them. Go back and review factoring, and as you're reviewing it, write those practice problems in here so that you have things to go back to. Okay. The first topic we studied in rational functions was about multiplying and dividing rational expressions. Right? And so again, I would give myself examples. Think about maybe the steps to success. What are the steps to success? Are they something that you need to go back and find in a PowerPoint? Are they something that you maybe need to go back and rewatch? Right? If you're dividing, remember, instead of dividing, you can multiply by the reciprocal. Right? So an important piece is the first thing you would maybe do would be factor. See what simplifies. Remember that you can't cross or cancel across addition or subtraction by definition of order of operations. Right? Maybe you need to indicate to yourself that at the end, if nothing else simplifies, the goal, like expand it, right? Don't leave it in factored form. So the textbook was great for this stuff. I would maybe go back and pull some practice out of the textbook, and as you're studying, incorporate those problems, those practice problems that you're actively doing into this section. Same thing for addition and subtraction and complex fractions. And if you recall, addition and subtraction required a little bit more because you needed a common denominator. Ideally, the least common multiple of the denominators. Remember that you can only multiply by 1. Well, that doesn't say 1. Remember, these are expressions. We started off with expressions, and the key piece is that they're not equations. There's nothing you're solving for, right? I would suggest maybe trying to simplify before you start adding and subtracting so that there's less simplification to do at the end, right? And then we had complex fractions, and there were several ways to do this, right? So this was probably something many of y'all could have done and did do prior to ever watching a video lesson on it, but there was a video lesson created to kind of show you a different way to do it where you could multiply by the LCM of the minor denominators. And while there's not a specific way you need to be able to do it. It's of value to know multiple ways and to be able to follow along with multiple ways and not just write something off to be like, that one doesn't fully make sense to me. Like, push yourself and challenge yourself to ask questions and develop an understanding of it, because yes, you would, if there was a problem that you had to analyze and it was done in a different method, you want to be able to take a look at that and be like, oh yeah, I see what's happening in these steps, even if it's not your personal preferred method. Right? Like, don't tie yourself down to one way of solving a problem. So I would probably give myself, you know what, maybe even it's the same problem. And I would solve it using the idea of least common multiple of the denominator. And then I would use it using what was in the video, right? So that you're able to see both methods. And then we got into solving rational equations. And this was nice because you don't have to multiply by 1 anymore. You just have to make sure that whatever you're doing to one side, you're doing to the other, right? It's an equation. It's like a scale. You got to keep it balanced. What was I going to say about this? Think about, this is where we really started to focus on what's eliminated from the domain. Right? Do you have extraneous solutions? You want to start off with this, then you know if they're extraneous. Right? I would, again, probably give myself an example or two. Right? Give yourself some challenges on this book so that it's of value when you look at it. Not in a week look at it, not in 3 days look at it, maybe not even in a month look at it, but when you're sitting in IB pre-cal next year and you learn about rational functions, you're building on these things. And we're not teaching it from scratch, but you're asked to recall specific things, and sometimes that can be challenging, but if you have this, you know exactly where to look and what's being talked about. Right? This is purposeful. This really led nicely into graphs of rational functions, right? Because those x values that were eliminated from the domain really went along with some of your asymptotes and what does your x values never equal, right? And so one of the things that was emphasized to you is the actual graphs of rational functions. And I shared that Delta Math does it really well with identify the characteristics, and that's a piece of this. But the other piece that you want to be able to do is graph, and I really want to emphasize this is without a calculator. You're using logic and the properties of a rational function and what happens and the end behavior and the different asymptotes and figuring out holes and does it cross an asymptote and the algebraic range and figuring those pieces out and kind of piecemealing it together to figure out what does it look like. So this shouldn't be involved with a calculator, and that's why I wanted to give a whole page to graphs of rational functions. If you think it's of value for you to do characteristics first and then do the graph, I get that. I considered that as well. I actually have the characteristics over here. Characteristics / features of graphs of rational functions, you might want to switch that, right? And so I would just make sure that if you're given an equation, can you find these characteristics and features, right? It goes hand in hand with the graph. They help each other out. But you want to think about, if I had an equation, I just needed to identify the range, I don't need to rely on the graph, right? So for instance, finding range algebraically would be something that I would make sure that I have here. How to find holes, not just the x value of the hole, but the entire thing. How to find the end behavior, right? So maybe you would want to do that, and you would want to put this page before you actually did graphs. If there's other things that I think this encompasses it. We didn't do applications of rational functions. That was an objective that we removed due to distance learning. So this is, you have space on this if you want to combine two things, or maybe you don't need as much room for something, or you can combine complex fractions with multiply divide. I don't know. To give yourself more space for some of the skills that you do want some more practice with. But these are really the things that should end up on here, and they're purposefully on here so that you can reference them when we see you in pre-cal, and they're a resource to you. So have fun making your little book and make sure that you're video gets submitted before we see you in class. And have fun. We'll see you next time.